We shall not start, Prof.
You want to start? Just a second.
Okay.
Yes, you can start. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. A very good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone, depending on where you are joining us from today. On behalf of Islamic Finance Connect, I warmly welcome you to our today's webinar with the title Global Trade War Implication for OIC Economies. We are delighted to have participants from different parts of the world joining us for this important discussion. I am Abdul Majid Muhammad. I will be your moderator for today's session, inshallah. Before I start, we are truly honored to have with us our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Muhammad Kabir Hassan, a globally recognized authority in Islamic finance and international economics. Professor Muhammad Kabir Hassan is a distinguished professor of finance at the University of New Orleans. Also, is a senior Fulbright scholar. He has served on several prestigious advisory councils, which include the World Zakat Forum and the IFA. Professor Muhammad Kabir Hassan is the most cited researcher and authority in Islamic finance and economics, is the top one scholar in the world, is one of the top 1% of peers to publish one referred article per year since 1990. Today, inshallah, we'll be looking into global trade war implication for OIC economics. But before I invite Professor Muhammad Kabir Hassan to begin, let me briefly set the stage for today's discussion. As we all know, over the past few months, the global economy has witnessed a resurgence of trade protectionism, particularly led by the United States. This is all about tariffs, which are essentially taxes imposed on imported goods, and it has been used as a tool to protect domestic industry and reduces trade deficit. However, this tariff, which is a measure, it has triggered retaliation from trading partners, most importantly, China. And it has created ripple effect across global supply chains. So for OIC nations, the implication go beyond just trade numbers. Higher tariffs can raise import cost, it can disrupt export competitiveness, it can alter currency alignment, and so on. So at the same time, these challenges may open doors for new alliance and maybe South-South cooperation among OIC members who share similar economic vulnerabilities. So with this background in mind, today's section could not be more timely. We are fortunate, alhamdulillah, enough to have with us Professor Muhammad Kabir Hassan, who will take us deeper into the subject and share his insights on how OIC economies can navigate these turbulent times. So, but before we start the session, I have a quick note for everyone here. So today's session will run for about 45 minutes, inshallah. And please, to all the participants, keep your microphone muted during the presentation. And inshallah, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So feel free to drop your question, inshallah, in the chat box as we go along. So with that, it is my privilege to invite Professor Muhammad Kabir Hassan to begin his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for inviting me to share whatever little I know with the audience. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Good morning from New Orleans. It's one of the southern cities in the United States. Rabbi Jadni Alman, Rabbi Shrahli Sadri, Waisirli Amri, Ahlul Ubdata Risani Yahka Kawli. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So let me start with first the structure of the OIC economies. As I said, this is a 57 member countries across 4 continents, making it the second largest intergovernmental organization after the United Nations. With a combined GDP of 8.9 trillion, it represents 8.5% of global economic output and is home to almost 2 billion people, or 25% of the world population. It has a diverse economic structures. There are countries, oil exporting economies, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, Iran, Nigeria, Algeria. There are manufacturing hubs like Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Egypt. There are agricultural focus like Sudan, Uganda, Burkina Faso, Mali, and there are service-oriented like United Arab Emirates, Malaysia, Turkey, and Morocco. You see my slide now?
Very well, Prof.
Okay, very good. So OIC is an economic powerhouse in terms of its position in the world. It, as I said before, it represents 1/4 of the humanity, but it is still punched below their weight economically. Current crisis, the tariff that has been started by Donald Trump, is creating an opportunity for these countries to come together and change these dynamics. Size matters in trade negotiations. Collective actions multiples countries leverage exponentially. And if you see the GDP growth projection, it is expected to grow, but compared to the other countries, the other regional bloc like European Union, we're still lagging behind. Even though OIC countries have 70% of oil reserve, this is energy superpower status, and it comprises 15% of global trade, but still there is massive untapped potential. Now, the economic structure of OIC countries reflects their diverse developing stages with a strong dependence on non-manufacturing industries, like 25.2%, particularly in oil exporting member countries. Trade wars disproportionately impact OIC economies due to the specific sectoral vulnerabilities and lower service sector development. Now, we have the oil exporter countries like Saudi Arabia, 67% of government revenue from oil. Iraq is 93%. UAE is diversifying. It now depends on the 45% of its fossil fuel. Now, export under pressure, country like Bangladesh, it has about 4.2 billion textile export at risk. Turkish steel industry facing 25% US tariff, and Malaysia electronic sector navigating supply chain chaos. So countries with diversified economies are weathering the storm better. The current tariff debacle that is started by Donald Trump. Those dependent on single sectors face severe stress, but also clear direction for necessary reforms. Now, the types of trade war impacts. First, the commodity price volatility. Trade disputes drive price fluctuations for oil exporters like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, affecting government revenues and fiscal stability. Manufacturing disruption. Manufacturing exporters like Turkey, Malaysia, Indonesia face decreased export demand and import cost increases from tariff-induced trade diversion. Investment uncertainty, FDI inflows to OIC decreased by 11.1% from 150 billion in 2023, 11.1% to 150 billion in 2023 from previous year, partly due to trade tensions, creating investor hesitancy in major projects, and global supply chain disruption. The global value chain integration is affected as production relocates in response to tariffs, challenging OIC countries' industrial growth. Impact mechanisms while exporting OIC member countries. Now, as you mentioned, we talk about price volatility. Oil exporting OIC countries are highly vulnerable to commodity price fluctuations triggered by global trade tensions. Trade wars affect oil prices through reduced global economic activity, altered trade flows, and market sentiment shifts, creating revenue instability for oil-dependent nations. And specific vulnerabilities, if you go country-specific, Saudi Arabia, oil sector 33% of GDP, 70% of export, 58% of government revenue. Each $1 change in oil price impacts fiscal balance by $3 billion. United Arab Emirates, oil sector 30% of GDP, 41% of exports, 36% of government revenue. More diversified than peers, but is still highly exposed to price shocks. Nigeria, oil sector 9% of GDP, but 90% of exports, 52% of government revenue, highly vulnerable to price volatility with limited fiscal buffers. So what are the fiscal and economic implications of such turbulence? Oil exporting OIC countries face significant fiscal pressure from oil volatility in the context of trade wars. Countries with more robust fiscal buffers, like United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Kuwait, show greater resilience than those with higher dependency ratios, like, for example, Iraq and Nigeria. Saudi Arabia's economic diversification strategy aims to reduce vulnerability, but the transition remains challenging in the short term. Economic spillovers, reduced domestic consumption and business investment, banking sector liquidity challenge, and delayed economic diversification initiatives by these countries. What are the policy responses? Accelerate the sovereign wealth fund investment, domestic fiscal reform like taxes, subsidies, and debt issuance to finance deficit average about 23% increase. And we really need to get away from this debt dependency because these are all interest-based and it has a long-term negative implication for these OIC countries. How about non-oil OIC economies? Non-oil OIC economies are highly vulnerable to trade wars through their integration in global supply chains and export dependency. Countries like Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and Egypt depend on manufactured exports, textile production, agriculture goods, and tourism services that can be disrupted by tariff escalations and reduced global demand. Exporters, Turkey, manufacturing export like automobiles, machinery, textiles, 83% of exports. EU market dependency, about 41% of total export go to European Union, and it has a trade deficit about $49 billion in 2023. Indonesia and Malaysia, electronics, palm oil, rubber exports. Malaysia, 38% of GDP from trade. Indonesia, electronic components trade with China, about 24.5% of exports. And if you look at Bangladesh and Egypt, Textile and apparel, 83% of Bangladesh exports. Egypt, tourism of 12% of GDP, Suez Canal revenues. Both are vulnerable to consumption shifts in Western countries. So what are the trade or impact mechanisms? First impact is direct tariff exposure. Manufacturing exporters face direct tariff imports, reducing competitiveness. Example, Turkey faces 14.6% average US steel tariff. Indonesian electronics subject to China-US spillover tariffs. Supply chain disruption, the second impact. Malaysian electronics sector, 67% of components integrated into China's export supply chain. So if something happens with China, that impacts Malaysia. Trade barriers disrupt this established network, raising input cost about by 12 to 18%. And the third impact, reduced market access. As major economies turn inward, Bangladesh faces estimated 8.7% export reduction in restrictive scenarios. Egyptian tourism projected to decline 12 to 15% during trade tensions. How about global and OIC context? So non-OIC economies face triple challenge from trade wars, declining export demand in key markets, rising input costs due to tariffs, and investment uncertainty delaying key FDI projects. Manufacturing-oriented economies like Turkey, Malaysia, and Bangladesh show high vulnerability, with electronics and textile sectors most affected. Supply chain shifts have created opportunities for some sectors, but overall impact is negative. So if you see trade or vulnerability by non-oil OIC economies on this table, Turkey, textile, auto parts, machinery, US-China exposure 32% of the export, and vulnerability is very high. And Malaysia electronics, palm oil, rubber, and 41% of the US-China exposure, and their vulnerability is very high. Now the supply chain disruption, global and OIC context again. Tariffs create cascading effects throughout global supply chain, with far-reaching impact beyond direct trade partners. When a 25% tariff is imposed on components or raw materials, cost increase by an average of 10 to 15% for finished products, affecting multiple countries in the production network. Again, first-order effects, immediate price increase on targeted products, reduce profit margins for direct exporters. 60% of affected firms absorb partial cost, and 40% pass cost to consumers within 3 to 6 months. Second-order effects, increase input cost across production networks, supplier and location shifting, trade diversion, because some producers leave the country if the foreign entities are doing their production in your country. Inventory stockpiling and logistic disruptions, production delays and reduced investment. OIC participation and global value chain. Average global value chain participation rate about 35% within OIC, but in the world average is about 52%. Forward participation, export used in other countries export about 23%, and backward participation, imports for export about 12.5%. While exporting OIC members, higher forward, lower backward integration, but manufacturing OIC economies, higher backward integration. Now, when you talk about sector-specific integration, textile and apparel for Bangladesh, Turkey, Morocco, electronics for Malaysia and Indonesia, automatic parts, Turkey, Morocco, and Tunisia, petrochemicals, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, food processing, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Egypt. So let's look at some country-specific information. Trade war impacts on major OIC non-oil manufacturing economies and their adaptation strategies. Turkey has about 10.2% of OIC export, is manufacturing focus, automotive, textile, electronics, machinery. Trade war impacts about 53.9% inflation rate, 2023. Currency volatility increasing input cost. It has 45.2 billion current account deficit. Adaptation strategies. So it's market diversification to Africa and Middle East, value chain, upgrading in manufacturing, and increasing intra-OIC trade exports up to 12%. Malaysia has 12.4% of the OIC exports and manufacturing focus again, electronics, electronic goods, palm oil processing. Trade war impacts, global value chain disruptions in electronics sector, reduction investment from China, US, and semiconductor export volatility. And how their adaptation strategies, they want to move more into ASEAN regional integration push, digital economy transition, and wants to increase intra-OIC trade up by 8.5%. Indonesia, manufacturing focus, textile, food products, electronics, footwear. Trade war impacts, export growth showed down 3.7% 2023. Input cost rises from global supply chain shifts and FDI uncertainty in manufacturing sector. And adaptation strategies, domestic market strengthening, and RCEP and other trade arrangements, regional trading arrangements, and halal product export push up to 14.6%. How about Egypt, Pakistan, and Bangladesh? Textile, food, and light manufacturing impact analysis amid global trade tensions. Egypt's response, diversifying export markets toward Africa and MENA, subsidies cotton production to secure supply chain, and 25% increase in regional trade agreements. Pakistan, technology upgrades in textile manufacturing, pursuing preferential access to Chinese market, domestic currency devaluation boosting competitiveness, and Bangladesh's response negotiated 20% tariff with the US, down from 37%, diversifying into technical textiles and PPE, and developing backward linkages to reduce import dependence. Now, OIC textile exporters in general, their labor-intensive sectors like textile, light manufacturing are highly vulnerable to global trade tensions, with estimated job losses of 200,000 plus across these three countries in 2023 and 2024. Bangladesh has shown greatest resilience due to scale advantages and negotiating power, while Egypt and Pakistan face greater challenges from input cost inflation. Regional integration with OIC markets offer significant mitigation potential, particularly for specialized product categories. How about Iran and sanctions? Iran faces a unique situation where decades of international sanctions are compounded by global trade wars, creating a perfect storm for its economy. With both US sanctions reinstated in 2018 and the disruption of global trade channels due to US-China tensions, Iran experiences multi-layered economic isolation. Iran's current account balance, however, rebounded to 17.8 billion surplus in 2023, despite sanctions, demonstrating resilience through trade diversification and import substitution strategies. And what are the economic resilience measures Iran has taken? Resistance economy, self-sufficiency focus in key sectors, regional trade, strengthen ties with neighboring OIC member countries, and creating alternative markets like economic partnership with BRICS nations. Now, if you look at Bangladesh, where I'm originally from, it has a current position, 84% of exports in textile, extreme concentration, 45 billion total exports, and $4.2 billion in risk, major supply to both US and EU markets. And the impact of trade war for Bangladesh, increased competition for displaced Chinese exports, our opportunity to capture market share if China is restricted, need for urgent diversification to reduce vulnerability. So what are the strategic response required for Bangladesh? Bangladesh exemplifies both the risk of over-specialization and the potential rewards of being positioned as an alternative supplier when major players are restricted. How about Malaysia's tech dilemma? High-tech, tough caught in crossfire. Strengths, 67 billion in electronics export, regional leader, integrated into global semiconductor supply chain, and strong relationship with both US and Chinese components. Challenges, technology transfer restriction limiting access to advanced chips, supply chain reorganization forcing costly adjustment, and competition from Vietnam and other alternative locations. That lists a competitive edge. Malaysian existing capability skilled workforce position it well to benefit from supply chain diversification, but active government support is crucial for capturing opportunities. Saudi Arabia's diversification imperative, you know about Vision 23 progress, non-oil economy growing from 30% to target of 50%. They have a big 500 billion NEOM mega project under development, but recently it has scaled it down. Sovereign wealth fund assets exceeding $700 billion. Now, trade war acceleration, oil demand uncertainty from global slowdown, urgency to accelerate economic transformation, and opportunity to use oil well for strategic repositioning. Oil, strategic insight, high oil prices provide financial cushion, but the volatility demonstrates urgent need for diversification. Current disruptions create political space for difficult but necessary reforms. So if you look at the regional integration, the missing link, so the current reality, OIC have about 18% intra-trade among themselves, whereas European Union have 64% of inter-trade. So there is a huge potential for them to increase from 18 to 35% is easily achievable. The current reality of their 381 billion current volume, the benchmark is 27% inter-trade, and they can easily increase it to 600 billion potential volume trade among themselves. Limited coordination, if you look at NAFTA, 41% of inter-trade, but for OIC countries, it can be increased to 218 billion opportunity gap. So the OIC countries has massive untapped potential, and why integration makes sense now, hedge against Western market restrictions like the United States doing, and many other countries where they try to impose restrictions, trade restrictions and different types of embargo. And OIC countries have to really stand on its own feet by having these linkages to reduce this vulnerability. Leverage complementary economic structures, build collective bargaining power. And I do not know whether you remember, there is 20 years ago by Najmuddin Erbakan of Turkey started D8, the big 8 OIC countries to have their own regional bloc. And it is still alive, but not very functional. Every successful region started with economic cooperation during crisis period, and OIC countries have natural advantages, shared values, complementary resources, and urgent need for alternatives. Now, the trade diversion opportunities, turning crisis into competitive advantage. If you look at electronics sector, $67 billion opportunity as production shifts from China. Malaysia and Turkey best positioned to capture market share. And what is required? infrastructure investment, and skills development. Textile manufacturing. Bangladesh and Pakistan can expand beyond traditional markets, opportunity to serve both restricted Chinese demand and diverted US-EU purchases. But the key is quality upgrading and compliance systems. Automotive parts, Turkey and Morocco positioned as European supply chain alternatives, growing demand for nearshoring to reduce Chinese dependence. What is needed? Investment, advanced manufacturing capabilities. Every trade restriction on major players creates opportunities for agile competitors who can quickly scale production and meet quality standards, and many OIC countries can provide this opportunity or take advantage of this opportunity. If you look at the infrastructure, the current gaps, the limited transport corridors between major OIC economies, inadequate digital connectivity for modern trade, and fragmented payment and logistical system. So there should be investment priorities, transport, $200 billion needed for regional corridor development, about $80 billion for fiber optic and 5G networks. Energy is about $150 billion for regional electricity and gas grids. China's Belt and Road demonstrates, the Belt and Road Initiative, you heard about this, demonstrate how infrastructure drives trade relationship. OIC countries can create their own connectivity networks with higher returns due to shorter distance and cultural affinity. Now, we can also have financial integration strategy. Market size opportunity, about 3.7 trillion in Islamic banking assets globally. 78% of those assets concentrated in OIC countries, but it can reach to $6.5 trillion by 2030. And what are these integration benefits? Independent payment systems reduce vulnerability to sanctions. Sharia-compliant trade finance supports regional commerce, and sukuk markets provide alternative to Western capital markets. Islamic finance principle aligned with sustainable development goals and ESG investing trends, providing access to growing global investment pools while maintaining independence from conventional financial systems. Now we can start with the OIC countries, bilateral agreements between major Islamic finance centers like Malaysia, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and then can expand network to include smaller countries. Technology transfer networks, building innovation ecosystem. The current situation, OIC countries account for only 2.3% of global artificial intelligence research. Heavy dependence on Western technology suppliers, the limited collaboration between OIC research institutions. Now, what would be the strategic response? Establish OIC technology transfer network, create joint research and development program, focus on areas of natural advantage, Islamic fintech, halal industries, renewable energy. So there are some success examples like Malaysian Islamic fintech leadership, United Arab Emirates space program achievements, and Turkey's drone technology development. 50 billion over 10 years in research and development and technology infrastructure with focus on practical applications rather than basic research. So manufacturing renaissance reshaping the global production. So if you look at the sector, electronics, textile, automotive, pharmaceutical, the current OIC share 8%, 15, 40, 4%, 3%. But investment needed in order to have this manufacturing hub, 67 billion, 23 billion, 45 billion, 34 billion in pharmaceutical. So the competitive advantages, the lower level cost than developed countries in the OIC countries, their higher skill levels than least developed countries, and strategic geographic positions between major markets. Government support for industrial upgrading, investment in vocational training, coordination to avoid destructive competition between OIC countries. Energy transition opportunities from oil dependence to energy leadership, renewable energy potential like solar, exceptional resources in Gulf and North Africa, wind, strong potential in Turkey, Morocco, and Central Asia, hydrogen, can leverage existing energy infrastructure and expertise. What are the market opportunity? 2.8 trillion global clean energy investment needed by 2030. OIC countries can capture 25 to 30% with coordinated strategy, and domestic energy needs provide guaranteed initial markets. So, OIC countries' strategic advantage combine abundant renewable resources with existing energy sector expertise and capital from oil revenues, and early movers can dominate emerging technologies before competition intensifies. How about digital economy acceleration? The current position right now, digital economy averages 8.3% of GDP across OIC countries. Significant gaps in digital infrastructure and skills, and limited participation in digital trade. What are the growth targets? Increase digital economy share to 25% by 2035, create 25 million digital economy jobs, and capture about $450 billion in additional digital value. What are the key enablers for this sector? Regional digital payment system, harmonized e-commerce regulation, cross-border data flow agreements, coordinated digital skills development. So the large young population provide natural advantage in digital adoption. Cultural and linguistic similarities facilitate regional digital integration. About agriculture and food security, 180 billion annual food imports across OIC countries. Imagine in every OIC citizen paid $100 per year just to import food that could be grown regionally. That's essentially what's happening. Countries like UAE import 85% of their food, while Pakistan and Turkey have massive agricultural surpluses going to waste. But this UAE is not importing them from Pakistan or EU the way it should. High vulnerability to global price volatility. When Russia invaded Ukraine, bread prices doubled across North Africa within weeks. OIC countries felt the shock despite having agricultural potential to feed themselves and export surplus. Limited inter-regional agricultural trade. Morocco ships oranges to Europe. Look, while Algeria imports citrus fruits from Spain, even though they are neighbors with similar climates and cultural preferences. Strategic opportunity for food security, reduce import dependence through regional cooperation. Picture Indonesia palm oil feeding Turkey's food processing industry, which then supplies the entire Middle East. This is not a fantasy, it's basic economic logic waiting to be implemented. Develop halal food value chain with global reach. McDonald's sources halal meat from dozens of countries for its Muslim markets. OIC countries could create integrated supply chain that dominate this 2.4 trillion market instead of competing as individual suppliers. Leverage diverse climate zones for year-round production. From Malaysia's tropical fruits to Turkey's temperate grains to Morocco's Mediterranean crops, the OIC spans every climate zone. It is like having a giant greenhouse that never stops producing. The global halal food market is worth 2.4 trillion by 2030, with OIC countries natural leaders in production and certification. Every practicing Muslim needs halal food. That is about 1.8 billion guaranteed customers looking for trusted suppliers. Financial services hub strategy. Heavy dependence on Western financial centers. Every OIC trade transaction basically gets a tax paid to London or New York banks, even when it's between Muslim countries. It's like neighbors paying a middleman to exchange goods across their shared fence. Limited integration between OIC financial market. A Malaysian company finds it easier to list on London Stock Exchange than Istanbul or Dubai. Meanwhile, Saudi investors struggle to buy Indonesian bonds despite both being major Islamic finance markets. Vulnerable to external sanctions and restrictions. When sanctions hit Iran, even unrelated Islamic banks face restrictions because they used Western payment system. It's like being locked out of your own house because someone else holds the keys. Now, hub development strategy, primary hub, Dubai, Kuala Lumpur, Istanbul. Think of this as New York, London, and Tokyo of the Islamic world. Dubai handles Gulf capital, Kuala Lumpur serves Asia Pacific, Istanbul bridges Europe and Middle East, together covering all time zones. Secondary centers like Casablanca, Almaty, Dhaka. These are like regional Federal Reserve banks serving their neighborhoods with specialized services. Casablanca for Africa, Almaty for Central Asia, Dhaka for South Asia. Specialized function, Islamic finance, trade finance, commodity trading. Instead of trying to copy Western models, these hubs focus on what OIC countries do best: Sharia-compliant banking, halal commodity certification, and cultural understanding on Muslim business practices. The competitive advantages the OIC countries have: time zone coverage from Asia to Africa. Like a relay race, as markets close in Kuala Lumpur, they are opening in Dubai, then Istanbul, then Casablanca. Islamic capital never sleeps. Islamic finance expertise and Sharia compliance. Western banks hire expensive consultants to understand Islamic finance. However, OIC banks live and breathe it. It's like native speakers versus people using Google Translate. Growing economic ties with emerging markets. While Western banks focus on mature markets, OIC banks are perfectly positioned for next billion consumers entering the global economy in Africa and Asia. 30 billion investment in financial infrastructure, regulatory harmonization, and talent development over 10 years. That's less than what Goldman Sachs spends on technology upgrades, but could create independent financial ecosystem serving 1.8 billion people in the Muslim world. So I'm coming towards an end. I want to share why this is happening among the OIC Muslim countries. So the second part, a few slides, structural colonialism in the OIC countries and the hidden hand after independence. So what is structural colonialism for OIC countries? Structural colonialism in OIC context means that even after the end of formal colonial rule, the political, economic, and social framework set up by the colonizer continue to benefit former colonial powers and the wealthy North, while leaving OIC countries at a disadvantage. This is less about direct control and more about rules and systems that keep OIC countries in a dependent or subordinate position. So some real-world example, as I mentioned before with numbers, but let's try to summarize it. Commodity trap and unfair trade. Colonial legacy. During colonial times, OIC countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia were organized to supply oil, cotton, rubber, coffee, or minerals to Europe while importing expensive finished goods. Still today, many OIC economies, think Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Egypt, remain heavily dependent on exporting raw materials, oil, gas, palm, while the most valuable processing and manufacturing happens in Europe, America, or Far East or East Asia. Result, OIC countries remain vulnerable to price swings and struggle to build strong, diversified economies. Debt and economic policy control. External borrowing. After independence, OIC nations often needed loans from Western-dominated institutions like IMF, World Bank to develop infrastructure. And what is the catch of this borrowing? These loans came with strict structural adjustment conditions, cut government spending, privatized national companies, and liberalized markets. And who benefits from this system? These policies often helped foreign investors, not ordinary citizens, and sometimes weaken local industries and social safety nets. Many OIC countries are still stuck in cycles of debt repayment. Number 3, control over our natural resources, oil and gas. Major OIC oil producers like Nigeria, Iraq, Algeria, and the Gulf states have often seen their resources controlled or heavily influenced by foreign multinationals like Shell, BP, Total. Profits go abroad, while local elites may benefit. Much of the profit flows out, and technology or management stays foreign controlled. And environmental legacy, extraction has also left environmental damage and social disruption in many OIC countries. Number 4, cultural and linguistic dominance. Language. French and English often remain official or business languages in OIC countries long after independence, shaping education and law in ways that sometimes marginalize local languages and traditions. Legal and political system. Many legal codes are still based on colonial models, sometimes conflicting with Islamic law or indigenous practices. Number 5, global decision-making power. International organizations, OIC countries have limited voice, and global institutions, IMF, World Bank, World Trade Organization, United Nations Security Council, where the West often writes the rules. Aid and development strings. Western aid to OIC countries often comes with conditions that prioritize donor interest, like the military alliances, market access, or political reforms over our local needs. Number 6, media and knowledge production, narrative control, global news, academic research, and even cultural representation are dominated by Western perspectives, often portraying OIC countries through stereotypes or security-focused lenses. So why is this a problem? The economic vulnerability, OIC countries remain dependent on a few exports and foreign capital, leaving them at the mercy of global markets and policies they don't control. Social and political frustration. When people see wealth and decision flowing outwards, it fuels resentment, unrest, and political instability. Barrier to real development. It becomes harder to build strong, independent economies in societies that reflect local values and priorities. So what can OIC countries do? Regional cooperation, trade more with each other, invest in joint projects like the Islamic Development Bank, and share technology and knowledge, value-added industries, move beyond exporting raw materials, invest in manufacturing technology and services that create more jobs and wealth at home, reform international institutions, work together to demand fair representation roles in bodies like IMF, World Trade Organization, and the United Nations, cultural revival, invest in local languages, history, and knowledge, promote Islamic and indigenous intellectual traditions alongside global ones, debt justice, advocate for debt relief or restructuring, especially for debts incurred under unfair or colonial era terms. So what is the long-term vision for 2040, the transformed OIC economy? So regional integration, OIC and beyond. So regional economic integration can serve as a strategic buffer against global trade tensions by deepening intra-OIC trade and strengthening regional agreements. OIC countries can reduce external dependence, create more resilient supply chain, and mitigate exposure to tariff shocks. And what is the integration benefits? Buffer against external shocks, reduce vulnerability to third country tariff escalation by 37%, according to IMF estimate. Supply chain resilience, regional value chain can reduce disruption risk by 42% compared to global dependencies. Growth multiplier, every 10% increase in intra-OIC trade correlates with 15% additional GDP growth, 1.5% GDP growth, bargaining power, coordinated position increase, negotiating leverage in multilateral trade forums. Supply chain integration and regional cooperation, value chain integration, strategic sectors develop integrated value chain in food security, pharmaceuticals, Islamic finance, and halal products. Complementary production, map industrial capacities across OIC to identify complementary manufacturing capabilities. Standards harmonization, implement unified product and service standards to reduce non-tariff barriers. And there's a success case, the Turkey, Malaysia, Indonesia, certified halal product certification and standardization, increasing cross-border trade by 27% in food product sectors already. Logistic collaboration, transportation corridor, develop dedicated shipping routes and air freight networks between major OIC commercial hubs. Border efficiency, implement digital customs system and single window clearance for intra-OIC trade. Digital infrastructure, create shared digital platform for supply chain visibility and trade documentation. So there is one success case I can tell you, GCC Logistics Network reduced cross-border transit times by 40% through unified customs procedure and integrated port management. Now, macroeconomic policies, exchange rate management, maintain flexible exchange rates to absorb external shocks, inflation targeting, implement counter-cyclical monetary policies to stabilize prices, financial buffers, build adequate foreign exchange reserve, minimum 6 months of import cover, and success story from Malaysia, maintain macroeconomic stability during 2018 to 2022 trade tensions through counter-cyclical policy interventions. Fiscal policies, strategic surplus, target affected sectors with temporary tax incentives and subsidies. Fiscal stabilization funds, create buffers during commodity bonds for use during downturns. Investment promotion, increase public investment in infrastructure and human capital. And social safety nets, protect vulnerable population during economic adjustment. And success case from Indonesia, develop targeted fiscal support to export-oriented SMEs facing trade barriers. Trade policies, trade facilitation, streamline customs procedure and reduce compliance costs. Market access, negotiate new trade agreements prioritizing intra-OIC market. Export credit, enhance export financing and insurance mechanisms. Standards harmonization, align with international standards to reduce technical barriers. A success story from Morocco, diversified export markets by increasing trade with sub-Saharan Africa by 42% since 2018. So I'm coming almost towards end. 2 more slides. Economic transformation goal. These are the 12 goals that I have pinpointed. Number 1, combined GDP reaching 45 trillion, currently is 24 trillion. intra-region trade exceeding 40% of total, technology leadership in key sectors, sustainable development across all member countries, major pull in multipolar world economy, leading voice in international economic governance, model for South-South cooperation and development, bridge between different regions and civilizations, poverty elimination across OIC region, universal access to quality education and healthcare, environmental sustainability and climate resilience, and cultural preservation and creative industry flourishing. Now, EU integration generated about 6 to 8% of GDP growth over 50 years. ASEAN integration delivered 4 to 5 times returns over 30 years. China's Belt and Road projected 3 to 4 times returns over 20 years. So risk-adjusted returns, even accounting for implementation challenges and external shocks, expect a return exceed 3 times investment, making this one of the highest return development strategies available. And this is what OIC countries should focus on. And the opportunity cost of not doing it, inaction cost estimated about 200 billion annually in lost growth, missed opportunities, and continued vulnerability. So this generation of OIC leaders has the chance to fundamentally transform the economic destiny of 1.8 billion people. The tools, resources, and opportunities are available. The only question is whether we have the vision and courage to seize this moment. So that concludes my presentation. I want to acknowledge the resources and writings of different people that I have used in my presentation. And thank you very much for listening to me. And may Allah accept my presentation and your time listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you very much for such thought-provoking and insightful session. From your session, you shed light not only on the challenges facing OIC economics in the context of trade war, but you have also shed light on the opportunities, the strategic responses available to policymaker and institution. So here, in order for us to stick to our time that we are going to finish in 10 minutes, we have some questions being sent by the participant here, and I will like to take them one by one, inshallah. This is the first one is from the Professor Mustafa Abu Bakr from Nigeria. He asked, saying that, Assalamu alaikum to Prof. Kabir and all, how long do you expect tariff war to last? And how to effectively draw attention of government in OIC country in order for them to realize the issues you've raised? So this is the first question, Prof.
Okay, to answer your question directly, it will last for during the entire time of President Donald Trump, because he has his vision. He's trying to completely restructure the US ethos, America first, the MAGA, make America great again. So not every American really ascribe to it, probably 50-50 split, but there's a big ideological shift is happening in the United States. So to specifically answer your question, it will continue until he ends his presidency by 2028.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Another question, this is from Anonymous. He said, if OIC countries pursue an isolationist strategy similar to that of the EU by focusing on strengthening trade among themselves only, would that be healthy in the long run? Wouldn't others retaliate against the OIC also?
No, it will not be healthy. This is my entire presentation. They really need to grow together. I mean, really need to come together. So this is a disruption, but that also created an opportunity for them to soul search and see why this is happening. It's very funny, like Algeria and Morocco. The Morocco, two countries sitting next to each other. They have both citrus fruit. One is exporting to Spain, the other countries importing from other countries. That doesn't make any sense. Now, you probably can, can send something from the United States to China faster than you can really trade something between two countries, let's say from Iraq, United Arab Emirates. Why this is so? Because colonial infrastructure, they have created the transportation hub. So we really need to, isolationist is not going to help you. And this is what the West is doing, actually, creating a division among ourselves. Look at what is happening in Gaza, in the war, everywhere. We cannot really, in one voice, can raise our voice that this atrocities, this war crime, this genocide must stop, because we are not united together. The West, the Pope of the Catholic faith is speaking more against these atrocities that OIC Muslim countries join together. So I hope our leaders will realize that we have to come together as a bloc, because we have a lot of things in common that are different. So we have to come on this common platform.
All right, thank you, Prof. The third question here is from my brother Mustafizur Rahman, if I pronounce it very well, correctly. He said, how have Trump's 2025 tariffs contributed to lower oil prices in Middle Eastern OIC countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE?
Lower prices? I didn't get the...
How have Trump's tariff contributed to lower oil prices in Middle Eastern OIC country? How has it contributed to lower oil prices? I think that is it.
It is not because of this tariff itself. And actually, this Donald Trump has threatened to impose 25% reciprocal tariff on India, because India is importing oil from Russia. But at the same time, there is a diabolical logic. There was implicit understanding between India and the United States that to stabilize the oil market, the oil price is falling, demand and supply. The demand and supply, the West is telling, and actually there's an implicit agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia. You pump oil, keep the oil price low, because if the oil price is low, it is helping the US economy, the rest of the Western economy. But why Saudi Arabia is pumping its oil? To help us? They should help their own countries. As I said, there are $700 billion the sovereign oil fund, but it's still Saudi Arabia borrowing. I mean, they are flush with liquidity. They are borrowing. So Saudi Arabia really have to look at make an independent foreign policy on their, the oil export and so on. And the current government is dynamic. I know MBS. Hopefully they are following a strategy which I do not know, but they really need to get out of the dominance of the United States and the Western world, because this is not really going to help the Muslim world. And Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Muslim world, and we all look forward to them.
Okay, thank you, Prof. This is coming from Moyosore Muhammad. He asked, what political issue impede OIC leadership from harnessing its potential as a leading intergovernmental institution towards achieving sustainable development?
I wish I know the answer. I'm sure the gentleman who asked me this question, there was a number of forums that I have attended. One lingering question that the Muslim world lacks leaders. We have many things. Allah has given us, everything you look at, natural resources, we are abundant. We also have a very skilled manpower too, but unfortunately, we do not have leaders. Occasionally, we see leaders coming up like Erdogan in Turkey, the Anwar Ibrahim in Malaysia, and right now Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh. But those type of leaders come occasionally, like sporadically. So we need to really develop this leadership based upon universal values. Of course, Islam is the connecting faith for many of the OIC Muslim countries. And in Islam, fairness and justice is the paramount importance. It is paramount importance only not for Muslim, if non-Muslim. Everyone should live in a country with equal access, justice, and fairness. And we have to develop this mentality from our education system. And as a Muslim, we should follow the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah and all major religions. If you look at, there are more convergence of social good than divergence. Yeah, faith we differ, but when it comes to living in a society, I mean, good is good. If a Christian says good, Muslim says good, Jews say good. So why can't we agree on this fiqh of muamala, or the living in a society, economic matter, trade matter, helping each other matter? But unfortunately, the nationalistic philosophy that is happening right now in the United States, in Make America, not only that they're trying to change many things, but ultimately it's not going to prevail, because America is built on very strong foundation. It has an institutions. Yes, Donald Trump is trying to change it, but I do not think that he's going to ultimately succeed. The American population, system, institutions, and people ultimately will resist it. And we're waiting, but we have to go through this, this upheaval, turbulation, changing things here and there. And, today in the morning, Donald Trump says one thing, in the afternoon, he says another thing. And a lot of uncertainty about this president. But let's say, and we have to endure this. And it is happening as our discussion, this tariff war that he started, because he thinks that United States is being taken advantage. To a degree, he's right. If you look at the data, in 30 years, since 1934, United States is imposing the effective tariff is about 3% roughly, 34 years ago. Right now, because of this trade war, he has increased the effective tariff on the US good about 20%. So, like one example I can give you, because he is very fixated on India, he wants to sell US agriculture product to India, where United States imposes almost zero tariff on Indian agriculture import, but India imposes about 70% on US agriculture product to India. So there are imbalances. That imbalance has been taken care of, but the way that probably plus minuses, but ultimately time will tell. But one thing we know, I mean, those who come from economics, international economics, tariff is like another tax. Ultimately, somebody will pay the tax. It's not the importer, it is not the producer. Ultimately, the consumers will pay this higher tax in terms of higher inflation. So when it goes to the level to the US citizens, because economists first, they are going to revolt against this policy. And that might even cause, the dominance of the Republican Party in the American political system right now. Right now, the president, the Congress, and Senate come from the same party. So we have a midterm election coming 2026. So there might be some changes because of this negative impact of tariff that's going to impact the economy. So that's the way I look at what's going to happen.
All right, thank you. Well put. I mean, next question, I think second to the last. This is coming from Omar Abdullah Ahmad. He said, how can we mobilize the courage and effort to save and also benefit from the current situation?
Of course, right now, in order to save your economy, because as I said, the dependency that we have developed, colonial legacy, we need to play with very safely with the US, because US is a huge market, and many countries, like the example I gave you about Bangladesh, so it imposed 37% reciprocal tariff. Already they have a 15%, so if you add 37, it's about 50 plus percent. And if Bangladeshi, you like manufacture, they sell ready-made garment, is about 80% of their export, and majority comes to the United States. It's about $4 billion business to the United States. So Bangladesh government did some trade negotiation. They have come to an agreement. They have reduced tariff of the US goods with Bangladesh, and also they have agreed to buy, the aircraft and so on. So this is the way you have to manage it. skillful trade negotiation, try to reduce it as much as you can. But long term, why this is happening? Why you worry about, if the US imposes tariffs is going to impact your country? Because you have developed your economy in a way that your export-oriented industry are developed on export to those countries. You never really thought that if something like this happened, which Donald Trump did, we never really thought that he's going to do that, but he did it. And there was some incidents like the US history, like 100 years ago and so on. They tried to increase tariff, but eventually they really did not impose it. But the Donald Trump actually showed it. Now, there are some truth to it. There has to be tariff rationalization. I, being an American citizen now, I will say this, but not the way it is happening right now. So to answer your question, skillful negotiation, try to keep the tariff as low as you can. In the meantime, you try to diversify economy, try to find alternative market, so that, and try to find, as I mentioned in my presentation, regional hub, increase your trade. Like right now, 11% in OIC, intra-OIC trade. We have to increase this intra-OIC trade, so that will reduce our dependence on the US and the Western countries. And we are not doing it. Why not? We can have a complementary production. We have many things in common. We can have a regional bloc. We have an example of European Union. We have an example of Asian countries. Is the leadership, is the foresightedness of our leaders. But unfortunately, many of the OIC countries, we do not practice democracy, surety principle. Citizens do not really rule the country. Only few oligarchs, only few people, those who are in the power, they run the country. So democracy, the institutions are very much weak or absent in many OIC countries. We need to improve it. And it squarely falls upon us, the educated class. We really need to develop this framework in our mind so that we work to change the system for the betterment of every citizen, regardless of race, sex, religion, and so on.
All right, thank you, Prof. I think the last question here coming from Dr. Kazim Fasoye from Fountain University in Nigeria. He said, is efforts in progress for OIC for an economic bloc in order to lessen the impact of future trade war from the world power bloc? Also, can we, he's asking, can we have the copy of the slide? That is the second question. For the first question, he said, is effort in progress for OIC for an economic bloc in order to lessen the impact of future trade war from the world power bloc?
This is what I have been saying in my presentation. Yes, it's very important. OIC has not been an economic bloc. It is a sort of, OIC is a political bloc, or I would say a political bloc, because you cannot really make one concerted statement, anything that happens against any of the countries. The OIC has been very, very weak in terms of working as a bloc. So what you are saying, so Najmuddin Arbakan, I mentioned in my presentation, there was a D8, the big eight OIC countries, Bangladesh, Nigeria, in terms of population, they try to develop a common market, or they have to increase trade among themselves, reducing tariff barrier, non-tariff barrier, and so on. So this is what we must do. We must do. And this is what the entire emphasis of my presentation, that we have to develop this Islamic bloc or OIC bloc as a political and economic bloc, so that it can have the bargaining power, it can increase trade among themselves, and it can negotiate with the rest of the world as a one bloc, like European Union is doing, or ASEAN is a regional bloc, they are doing. So we really must do that.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I think this last question, someone has asked that question before, so about the slide. That can they have the copy of slide?
Yeah, I'm going to send it to you, okay? Later on.
Inshallah, we will share it with them. Thank you so much. With this, we want to say our big thanks to you, Prof. Muhammad Kabir Hassan, even though we've taken more than the time that we promised. So thank you for such a thoughtful, provoking, and insightful session. Jazakumullah khairan for this. I would also like to thank all our participants for joining us from different parts of the world. Your engagement question, it has enriched this discussion. So lastly, on behalf of Islamic Finance Connect, we truly appreciate your time today. Please stay connected with us for upcoming session, inshallah, and upcoming initiative. With that, we officially conclude today's webinar. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam. Let's keep in touch. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you so much, Prof. Jazakumullah khairan.
Yeah, by the way, can you send me some screenshot? Did you take some screenshot, any of you?
Yes, we did take some, inshallah. We share it. We share it with
Yeah,
you.
please share it with me right now if you can. Okay, thank you.
Okay, inshallah. Okay, thank you so much, Prof.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.